Welcome to the program, everyone. I am Dr. Chris Martinson here with a very exciting episode for you. As you know, we've been working tirelessly, at least from my perspective, for years now, trying to figure out what's going on, what is actually happening out there in the world, and looking for frames that will help us understand it. Now, it's a very complicated world. A lot of different ways we could look at this. We could look at it through an energy lens or a financial lens or a political lens or a geopolitical lens. And hopefully we're trying to assemble a view of what's happening in the world. Now, as you know, I'm a systems guy. I think if we understand the system that's involved, we have a better chance of understanding the outputs of that system rather than just trying to analyze the outputs and make sense of it. So what's the system? Today, really honored to have with us CJ Hopkins, award-winning playwright, novelist, author, and the author of this extraordinary book here, which I'm going to recommend for everybody very highly. This is The Rise of the New Normal Reich. It'll come like this, but without all the little Post-its, because that's me marking up the book, doing what I do, which is reading and taking notes. And this one, I had to take a lot of notes on. I was reading this book out loud to my fiance over breakfast because passage after passage was really catching me. So before we dive into that, CJ, welcome to the program. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
So, extraordinary book, and I want to start with what's extraordinary about it for me was, that I had only very recently come across your writing, and as soon as I did, I couldn't understand how I hadn't come across it before. I think we'll have a conversation about censorship and about how certain authors' messages are limited. We'll get to that later, but what caught me was this first chapter here. After the introduction, it's called The Great Chinese Bat Flu Panic of 2020, and it's dated March of 2020, and already in March of 2020, you're beginning to call into question things that years later people are starting to finally get their head around. So let's start there. How long was it before you'd heard about the Great Chinese Flu, before you started to wonder if maybe it was something different than was being presented?
Well, it was right around then, actually. It was late February and March of 2020. I'll tell you a story. I was running script writing workshops at the time here in Berlin. So, international writers from different places in Europe. And one of my writers was from Italy, and she went home for the holidays. This is, 2019, Christmas holidays and New Year holidays and what have you. And she came back and gave everybody a really nasty flu. And so, we all got sick, and my wife and I had it, and, it was, just a nasty flu, and it went away, and then it came back, and it lingered for a while. I didn't really think very much of it because here in Berlin, I usually catch a pretty nasty flu, once or twice during the winter season anyway. And then all the stories started coming out in the news. And I think the thing that there were a couple of things that set off alarm bells for me right away. The first one was just this iconic picture of, people lying dead in the streets of, Wuhan, and with, health workers with hazmat suits. And I think people can find this picture if they don't remember it. It just seemed crazy to me. And the second thing was when the WHO announced that they thought that there was a fatality rate of, I forget what it was, 3.4, 3.7% or something. And I had a little fun with that, I think, in the second essay of the book, when you start doing the math on that. It just, the propaganda that was unleashed right at the beginning of this just reeked of propaganda to me. It's what I pay attention to generally, and it just reeked of official propaganda to me, and I just started doubting it and digging into it.
Yeah, I called this an official pandemic, I think, in January of 2020, but I was using the WHO's own guidelines. They have a pamphlet out there. They have a booklet, a big PDF. This is what a pandemic is. So it was ticking these boxes. And then the next thing I know, Tedros of the WHO is coming out saying, well, we wouldn't really want to block flights from this place all these, deadly pandemic viruses are located because, well, that might impact global trade. to an unnecessary degree, or it might be racist, right? So that was my first scratchy record moment. Was like, that is absolutely not what you do. Textbook 101. If you're really concerned about this thing. Alternatively, if your intent is to have this thing spread as widely as possible, those are the kinds of BS excuses you might give while you're allowing flights to leave from Wuhan. And then I was looking at FlightAware, this tracker, and noting that China wasn't allowing internal flights from Wuhan anywhere, but they were now going all over the world, including landing in Italy, where I think Bergamo had a horrible run of that in March of 2020. So a lot of scratchy record moments early on, weren't there?
There were. The other thing, I think the other thing that sort of clinched it for me was watching the rollout of the new normal. I tried to document this in the book. The book is primarily a collection of essays that were written, month by month as it all happened. I tried to document it there and I tried to focus on it in the book a little bit. It really was. It was bizarre. So even if I just assumed, okay, there's a nasty respiratory virus going around, okay, and people should pay attention to it. Suddenly, all of these mouthpieces of authority were announcing that there was going to be a new normal, and that life was never going to be the same again, and that society was going to have to be radically restructured. And I tracked this, and I watched this, just media outlet after media outlet, so-called health authority after health authority, government official after government official, down to just tiny random blogs, pumping out, repeating this message about how, okay, it's time for a new normal. And just the idea, even if I took the information that was coming out about the virus from the authorities, even if I took that at face value, the idea that global civilization, global society needs to be radically restructured because of a nasty respiratory virus is just patently insane. It's insane on its face. And that's what really got me going. I'm a student of ideology and propaganda. That's mostly what I focus on, and that's clearly what I was watching. Was the messaging that was involved in rolling out this radical restructuring of society, and we've seen it. It's ongoing, but to a great degree, it has been accomplished.
Well, it has, and that's what I really want to get to, because right here in this first essay from March, which is at the front of your book here, you say, so let's get to the systems around this. So we're talking about, what is this and why is it happening? You said, no, it doesn't involve Bill Gates, Jared Kushner, the WHO, and a global conspiracy of Chinese Jews defiling our precious bodily fluids with their satanic alien 5G technology. Love the sarcasm and stuff there. It's a little less exciting and more abstract than that. See, I try to focus more on systems like global capitalism than on individuals and on models of power, as opposed to the specific people in power at any given time. Looking at things this way, the global lockdown and our brave new normal makes perfect sense. This is what I want to get to, because that framing. So global capitalism, if I could translate, you're basically saying, look, Klaus Schwab magically goes away, Bill Gates magically goes away, and nothing changes because seamlessly two new characters rise into those top spots because of the system. What is that system?
I call it, I've been using a nickname for it. I call it Globocap. It makes some people crazy. Some of my conservative readers get excited and need to defend capitalism. And I try to remind them I have a kind of complex view, perhaps uncharacteristically these days, which also annoys my friends on the left. I don't see capitalism as this evil monster. I think it's good to remember capitalism is actually what freed us from the tyranny of kings and aristocracies and all of that a few hundred years ago. I focus on ideology. I'm not a financial expert. I'm not an economist. And so I'm looking at capitalism as an ideological system. And I'm looking at global capitalism because that's the system that we live under right now. What does capitalism do? How did it free us from those tyrannies and from the aristocracy and all of that? Ideologically, what it did is it basically decoded all of those despotic values that were governing society at the time. We used to live in a despotic world where if the king said something was worth, 20 pounds, it was worth 20 pounds, because if you disagreed, the king would send soldiers and kill you. Or if the church said that, God was X, Y, and Z, then God was X, Y, and Z, or the church would send its soldiers and kill you. It was a despotic world. Capitalism came along and decoded all of those values and reconfigured power in society. And that's what capitalism basically does ideologically. Okay, so jump hundreds of years ahead to where we are now. I started tracking this in earnest right around the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. I grew up in the Cold War world, 60s and 70s and what have you. And 1989 got my attention. What I said is, okay, we are really entering a new world. We're entering a phase of history that is truly unprecedented, because what we've got is one world that is completely dominated by a single ideological system. Right, but communism, Marxism, what have you, virtually disappeared as a viable ideological adversary, and we became a global capitalist world, and that happened, starting '89 through the early '90s. Okay, so what does that mean? That's what I started asking. What does that mean? This has never been possible before in history. It is possible now. What is this global hegemon going to do? And what I've been tracking for the last 30 years or so, it seems like the completely predictable behavior of a global hegemon. Once you control the entire territory of the planet and you have no external ideological enemies anymore, what is left to do? Well, what's left to do is clear and hold. This is, military term. This is what occupying forces do once they've conquered a country. They go around through the territory that they're occupying, and they identify little pockets of resistance, holdovers from the old regimes, what have you, and they eliminate them. And the whole purpose is to eliminate these little pockets of resistance and create ideological uniformity, right? Get everybody on board with the new program. If you look at the last 30 years of history, that's what I see. So the Soviet Union falls apart. We become a global capitalist world. What does the global capitalist system do? It starts a clear and hold up. It starts in Eastern Europe, and it goes in and destabilizes and restructures and privatizes, some holdover societies there. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the global war on terror. The Middle East needed some serious destabilizing and restructuring, and that went on and on and on. Meanwhile, it's also this clear and hold up, this destabilizing and restructuring is also happening, in the heart of the empire. But it's happening subtly, and it's happening gradually right up until about 2016, at which point you start to see this huge populist, quote unquote, populist backlash, which leads to Brexit, which leads to the rise of a lot of right-wing or neo-nationalist movements in Europe, which leads to the election of Donald Trump. And my previous collection of essays is titled "The War on Populism," because that's pretty much what I covered all during the Trump years, was global capitalism's response to this populist uprising, not in the Middle East, not in some faraway country, but right in the major countries of the empire. And it was an absolutely unprecedented draconian reaction on the part of the system to crush. It wasn't about Donald Trump. I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but he became a symbol of people who were pushing back against the hegemony of what I call global capitalist ideology. That continued all the way up to the end of the Trump term, and culminated in the so-called the attempted coup or what have you on the Capitol by a bunch of unarmed people, mm-hmm. And seamlessly faded into the COVID pandemic. Right? That's a long babbling argument, Chris. The simple version of it is what I think I'm watching is the absolutely predictable behavior of a globally hegemonic system, which has nothing else to do other than eliminate internal resistance and consolidate and tighten its power over the territory that it controls. That's the way I understand. If you dig into the facts surrounding the pandemic and you compare them with the authoritarian, totalitarian measures and propaganda programs and censorship programs that have been rolled out in response to it, these things are clearly about tightening control of society and not simply a response to a respiratory virus.
Yeah, thank you for that. A lot to unpack there, and it's almost like you're describing, CJ, global cult. A lot of what I hear you talking about, because I've had to look into cults, cult-like behavior, mass psychosis formation. I'm a scientist. I had to go down a lot of psychological and sociological routes to begin to unpack and understand what's happening here. But what you're talking about then, I think there's a part in your book which really caught me was when you were describing ideology. I like to unpack things. So can we just talk about that word? What is an ideology and what does it require of itself and its participants in order to be complete?
It depends on the context of the conversation that you're having it in. An ideology, almost any set of beliefs can be an ideology. You can call it an ideology. When I say that I'm a student of ideology or I'm tracking ideology, I think I probably go back to Marx's definition of ideology, which is it's not just a set of beliefs, but ideology is essentially it's what we think of as just the way things are. Mm-hmm. The governing ideology, the ideology that actually has power over our lives, is not the one that we can point at and say, oh, look at this crazy stuff these people believe. It's the ideology that we're not aware of. It's the things that we take for granted, for axiomatic truths. It's interesting. You can look at 20th century totalitarian systems, and you can look at how ideology functioned, for example, in Nazi Germany, and how people were, reinforcing that ideology. And it's relatively easy for us to do that. It's almost impossible for us to look at our own ideology. And our ideology is a global capitalist ideology. I talked a little bit about how capitalism decodes despotic values, right? Well, what does it put in their place? That's the thing about capitalism, is it really only has one value, which is exchange value. And as a machine, as a system, all it really knows how to do is go into territories, decode whatever despotic values might still be there, and render everything a commodity or a potential commodity, right? And just increase the flows of the market, right? Now I'm getting lost in my thoughts. What kind of an ideology does a system like that have? right? It's not, there's no Mein Kampf, there's no, the Communist Manifesto. You can't go and find a book where someone has set forth this ideology. It's an ideology that passes itself off as reality. As reality. It's almost unidentifiable as ideology. And nonetheless, it is ideological. I come from the theater, and I used to drive my actors crazy. On the first day of rehearsal, I would sit them down, and Chris, we're talking downtown New York City, okay, experimental theater. We're all, wearing leather jackets and berets and stuff, dressed in black, and reading Foucault. And I would sit them down and I would say, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the best actor in the United States of America. And they would become furious with me, and I'd say, no, I'm absolutely serious. At that time, Schwarzenegger, I think, had the highest income in Hollywood. And what I would say to them is, we can believe whatever we want. You can worship whatever actor, Daniel Day-Lewis, whoever you want. But the fact of the matter is, in our society, we have no other measure of excellence other than earnings, income, money. Therefore, according to our values, Arnold Schwarzenegger is the best actor in the United States of America. And what I was trying to point out to them is the difference between the private ideologies or the subcultural ideologies that we may hang on to, and the ideology that actually governs our lives. It's a complicated and I think fascinating subject. Saudi Arabia is another example that I bring up often. Saudi Arabia is a theocracy, no? Sure, and there's an official ideology, fundamentalist Islam and what have you. But when that theocratic ideology comes up against global capitalist ideology, which ideology wins? Global cap wins. Saudi Arabia is a key functioning part of the global capitalist system. And when they're between a rock and a hard place, global cap ideology wins. Just another example.
Yeah. Well, it's so this idea then that an ideology, though, even if it isn't written down somewhere, it still has its own set of rules, and it doesn't like as in a cult, the leader of the cult doesn't really brook any dissent. So I really feel part of this clear and hold operation as I've been watching mainstream news, big tech, social media. I mean, I'm on the receiving end of having been censored a bunch of times because I simply had an inconvenient sort of point of view, which often meant I was just a few months ahead of officially sanctioned news, right? I could read a preprint and make a conclusion and deliver that conclusion to people, and I would find myself censored. And then months later, it's okay to talk about that, right? Around the lab leak, around some of the vaccine side effects that are now coming to light, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out just being out of step with the ideology is enough for an official spanking, whatever that means, from the keepers of the system. Those keepers of the system, nobody has to instruct them to do that, though, right? There's no smoky room with cigar chomping people laying down the law, right? These foot soldiers know exactly how to behave because they're within the ideology. Is that correct?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
You see it different?
Chomsky made this point. Yeah, Noam Chomsky made this point a long time ago. It's of course, nobody needs to be handing out orders and telling these people what to do. They have been, in order to get into the position of power that they're in, they have been through a long conditioning process that started in their preparatory schools and then on through university and what have you. And by the time they get into a position of power, they have been extremely well trained in how to think and what to pay attention to and what not to, they have internalized this. They don't think. I believe most of them don't think of themselves as propagandists. They actually believe that they're reporting reality. Yeah, it's. Of course, there are conspiracies, but it's not necessary to think that way. If you look at how the system functions, It really doesn't. It really doesn't need conspiracies. You're talking about censorship and the demonization of skeptics and dissidents and critics. It's another example. It might be a good example to try to shine a light on global capitalist ideology again, which I think is difficult to do. It's just complex. When we are demonized, and of course I've been demonized since the beginning of this as well, like you have, and so many of us have. And the way that, if you look at the way that we are demonized, we are not demonized as traitors. We're not demonized as counter-revolutionaries. We're not demonized for any political reasons, right? We are demonized as crazy people, right? Or we are demonized as liars. Right? Either what we are spreading is disinformation or misinformation, or it is just insanity because we have some sort of psychological condition. And this is a perfect example of the ideology of global capitalism at work, because it can only exist by presenting itself as non-ideological. It presents itself as reality. Right? So who would possibly question reality? Crazy people. Only crazy people question reality, or liars, people who are intentionally lying. Right? So we've moved from a world of ideological conflict where you had advocates of capitalism arguing against Marxists, and there was an actual ideological argument going on, right? We've moved into a place where that argument is over, and power is claiming the authority of reality for itself. Therefore, it demonizes its opponents, its critics, not as political adversaries, but as crazy people, as abnormal people, or as just bald-faced liars.
Yeah, and I'll go even further than that, I would suggest, as the othering is what I've been writing about this as, this othering, watching Justin Trudeau do it against the truckers, right? These weren't just people who ideologically disagreed. These were misogynists, rapists, Nazis, you name it, right? So all of that. And then watching the physical treatment of, say, the Gilets Jaunes by Macron in France, right, where they were specifically taking their little laser optics with the bean bags and targeting people's eyes so they could blind them. That takes a level of depravity, of othering. Like, these aren't just your opponents; these are subhumans at this point. I mean, am I overdoing it? But that's how I saw it. There was no other excuse for 3,000 people to have been maimed by the police in France unless they were trying to.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're overdoing it at all, Chris. And you probably, I'm sure, viewers remember, the iconic pictures of the police horses in Canada, running over, a woman who was in a walker or what have you, and just mercilessly assaulting a bunch of protesters who were absolutely nonviolent. It was just classic nonviolent civil disobedience. Right. The othering, it's dehumanizing. And this is something I think that's common to all forms of totalitarianism. I think the thing that makes it unique in our case is maybe not entirely unique, but the thing that I think is remarkable is the disappearance of the legitimate political argument, and the system's assumption. The system has taken unto itself the authority to dictate reality. In other words, it is no longer arguing. It no longer has to argue with us. It doesn't. You don't need to argue with crazy people, right? And by dehumanizing us as lunatics or idiots or or liars, we don't need to be argued with. We just need to be crushed. And you saw this thematic all the way through the last 2 years, and it continues now, less intensely, but it continues now. I think it's something that I had been tracking before 2020. It's something that I started tracking back in 2016. This pathologization of political dissent, right, where it's no longer regarded as a political position or a political argument. It's simply, here are these deviants who are deviating from the norm, who are deviating from reality, and they either need to be cured or crushed. So I think it's extremely insidious.
Now, so here's the thing I have trouble with is that this ideology obviously has some internal inconsistencies that border on mad incoherence, right? And so if you even start to point those out, you get that blank look and, you're the crazy person. So quick example, as Edward Abbey said, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell. It obviously is a self-destructive ideology to the cancer cell. That's what capitalism has turned into, what I'm going to call capitalism. Good, true capitalism, you have actual price signals that feed back into the system through an open and fair market. We don't have that. I've studied markets enough to tell you we have nothing even remotely close to free and fair and open pricing. We now have politburos, we call it the Federal Open Market Committee, we call it the ECB, who know the true price of all things, obviously in their infinite wisdom. And so they set prices for money itself, debt, things that then feed into every other price. So we don't even have good price signals, but you look at the world through the ecological lens and you say, oh my gosh, you got the microplastics, you got the neonicotinoid devastation of the insect populations, you've got the basic, there's no thiamine in the oceans anymore. How did we even mess that up, right? On and on and on. There should be some feedback signals coming back to the system saying, whoa, Bucky, this growth, constant growth thing might have some issues you want to look at. You can't have that conversation. The closest we can get is people flying around the world in jets, private jets, telling us that we need to take cold showers because of climate change, right? So the incoherence is starting to mount. Doesn't this create some cognitive dissonance in the troops at some point?
I think it probably does. I don't know. I'm not privy to their conversations. I think it probably does. I think it points to it points to an argument that I've been making, and it's a difference of perspective. Whether one looks at these individuals, looks at the individual powerful people who are guiding things and making decisions and implementing programs and what have you, or whether one focuses on the system itself. All right, you just used the Abbey quote. A cancer cell does not have a consciousness. It doesn't have a plan, and a system doesn't have a plan. It's a machine. It does something. It functions. And my understanding is, machines are wonderful things, and I think capitalism is an incredibly powerful machine. It's an incredibly scary and destructive machine if we take our hands off it and let it run everything. Right? That's when it functions like a cancer. Capitalism, it knows how to do things. It knows how to decode despotic values. It knows how to create market flows, what have you. It doesn't know how to create societies. I don't have the economic solution for humankind, right? But one thing I think is that if we're going to have capitalism, we probably need to use that machine inside of a strong society that has its own values, right? And which is willing to limit that machine and restrict that machine when necessary and use that machine for whatever wealth it can generate. But a society that is willing to place its values above the values of the machine. For most of my life, I spent a lot of my life in the United States. I felt like I haven't been living in a society, Chris. I've been living in a marketplace. right? I think the United States is sort of the tip of the spear. It's one of the reasons I think that I ended up in Europe is because we still have the vestiges of social democracy here. There's a social safety net. There are parliaments rather than the U.S. system, and there is still, it's not perfect by any means, as we have seen, but there is still this vestige of an understanding that the market should not create our society. We should create our society, and we should use the market rather than serving it like slaves. Yeah, is what it comes down to. It's when I talk about Globocap, I'm not talking about the guy that runs the corner store, a guy with a little manufacturing business, or, I'm not talking, people have been buying and selling things and owning property and paying each other to do things since the dawn of human civilization. When I'm talking about Globocap, I'm not talking about that activity. I'm talking about this vast global hegemonic system, which, as you described it, as Abby described it, is like a mindless cancer that is running amok, unattended by us. Or maybe those fellows believe that they are running it, but I don't believe they are. I believe it's running them.
I completely agree, and thank you for bringing this up. Very well said, because so I want to turn now to this World Economic Forum, the WEF, the Davos crowd, Klaus Schwab, all of that, right? And they've been very open and transparent. Bless them. They put it right on their website. They put out PowerPoints. They're very open. And they put out this movie, a little trailer in 2016, which was just 8 slides and some music. And the first one caught a lot of people's attention because it said, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy," right? Maybe, maybe not. I'm sure they were positive about the first part, which is you'll own nothing, because obviously they're going to run that global cap system to print money, hand it to themselves, and buy everything up while impoverishing everybody. So I think that's fine. The one that caught me, though, is germane to what we're talking about now, was number 8, which was Western values by 2030 will have been tested to the breaking point. And now I scan my newspapers, and apparently, the most important thing ever in my country right now is transgender rights, putting up different colored flags to represent people's sexual orientations, and really focusing a lot of attention around that. And I'm over here looking at us running out of resources worldwide and seeing this extraordinary battle shaping up for literally what I consider to be the survival of most humans. And it's like my priorities aren't even remotely on balance with what they're talking about as being supposedly the most important thing that we have to be discussing as a culture. But this is actually really testing the bedrock of a culture, isn't it? Right? Just to say, hey, let's just re-examine what humans knew for thousands of years to be true, that there was male and female biology, right? We can't even get biology right. So excuse me, but this feels intentional, as if somebody's intentionally trying to confuse us by making sure that this reality we have to live in, we don't have a shared reality anymore. Like, I can talk to people, we no longer have a shared reality about what used to be pretty shared. Terra firma for a long time is now terra infirma. Is this intentional, or do you think this is just the machine doing what it does?
I think it's the machine doing what it does. And I'm going to get in trouble talking about this. I try to avoid the topic. I'll tell you the truth, Chris, I try to avoid it as much as possible, but I'm going to go ahead and get in trouble and talk about it. And so before I do, I just want to state that, I lived in San Francisco in the 80s before the dot-com boom. And I come from the theater world. So many of my friends have been gay, and in San Francisco, I was using pronouns, in 1986 and 1987. In 1988, it was no problem. There was Sheila or whoever, and it was like, "Hi, sweetheart, hi, honey, how you doing?" And I was using pronouns. I had no problem using pronouns whatsoever until groups of militant Maoist-like activists started surrounding people and waving their fists in people's faces and demanding that they, display their ideological loyalty by, using the pronouns or doing whatever. Here's where I get it. Here's where I'm going to get in trouble with it. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's systemic. I think it is an integral part of what I describe as global capitalist ideology. If you understand global capitalism ideologically, again, not economically, not financially, ideologically, what it does is it decodes despotic values. And I use the word despotic. For most people, that sounds really negative. It sounds like it comes from a despot, Yeah. But not all despotic values are so negative. What the word essentially means is these are values that we have because we want to have them, not because we have, scientific data that proves that this is the way it is. It's simply, we want to live this way. Right? A community gets together and decides, these are our values. This is the way we want to live. This is how we want our society to function. Right? Those are despotic values. They're not based on any, scientific facts. They're an expression of the will of the community, or in the old days, an expression of the will of the despot. Right? What capitalism does essentially is it has to eliminate and decode all of those despotic values, because you can't reduce everything to exchange value. You can't reduce everything to a commodity, and have this free-flowing marketplace with all of these despotic values running around, right? And so how far do you want to go? Religious values, these are despotic values. They don't really function in the marketplace. Right? You were getting into gender ideology, right? Well, it's in the marketplace. In the marketplace, if I say I'm a woman, I'm a woman. Who are you to say that I'm not a woman? There are no values. Our society doesn't have any functioning values to preserve those distinctions, right? If I can market this idea, if I can dissolve these traditional despotic, values, understandings of what men and women were, well, anybody can be anything, right? Anybody can be anything. What I believe we're watching, is the radical decoding of what is left of despotic values in the world. To pull it away from the trans issue for a second, what's the problem in the Middle East? What was the problem in the Middle East during the global war on terror? It's certainly not a country like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a theocracy, but they completely play ball with global capitalism. This is somewhat similar to, the devout fundamentalist Christian who goes to church every Sunday, reads the Bible every night, and what have you, but functions according to the values of global capitalism on a day-to-day basis. All right? We're allowed to have all of these ideologies as long as our primary ideology, the ideology that actually controls how we live and what our values are on a daily basis, is global capitalist ideology. All right? And global capitalist ideology, there is, I don't know how to describe it other than to say, Chris, anything is anything. Anything can be anything. I don't mean to get all philosophical on everybody, but what is a commodity? What is exchange value? It's another thing that I used to drive my actors nuts with. Essentially, the collected works of William Shakespeare and, a 14-karat diamond and a plastic fork are all essentially the same. They have no inherent value. Their value is assigned to them by the marketplace on an ongoing, fluctuating basis. That's where their value comes from. And that's the world that we are increasingly living in. What I'm watching, you're talking about the trans issues. what I'm watching is that machine, that values decoding machine, doing what it does, it just cranked up to 11.
Yeah. And so let's talk about why that's at 11 right now. I have this sense of desperation in the air, right? So maybe this is just what you have to do when you're in your final stage of clear and hold. It's your equivalent of cultural shock and awe. You just got to, get the tanks to roll over the situation as fast as possible. But I have this other sense of, I have this debate or discussion all the time with people in my inner circle is, what's the ticking clock? Like, what's the emergency? Right? You can all feel there's some emergency, and Klaus Schwab said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." We only have this little window with this coronavirus. Let's make the most of it to get our great reset going. But where they want to reset us towards is this really bizarre world of highly mechanistic AI, transhumanism. Basically, like, humans are just going to take the Enlightenment and ram it all the way down to its illogical, hyper-masculine conclusion of, we can control all the billiard balls in the universe, or finally be under our control, and then we'll finally get this sweet certainty out of life that has eluded humans forever and ever. But that leaves aside beauty, mystery, awe, all the feminine archetypes. It fundamentally, like, steamrolls itself to a conclusion that, what if you're not down for that ride? What if you believe that there's some intrinsic, inherent value to things that we can only know through our humanness, not our reduction into a tiny collection of billiard balls with known trajectories, right? There's something missing in their story for me that's just not exciting at all. I'm not down with their plan. I got to be honest. It feels cold and like Blade Runner to me.
There's quite a lot missing in their plan, and I'm smiling and laughing because you're playing my tune. You held up my latest collection of essays. But I wrote a novel I finished it in 2017, I think, published it, called Zone 23. And it's a satirical dystopian vision of the future. And you were describing quite a lot of it. At the core of it, and thank you, you're getting me all philosophical and spiritual today. At the core of it, I think is something that's really kind of insane and destructive. And at the core of it is this idea, or is this approach to life that looks at life, that looks at people, at history, and people are amazing to me. We are beautiful, ugly, kind, vicious, genius, idiotic, contradictory, messy creatures who have, perpetrated incredible horrors and created amazing, works of genius and beauty. And it's this mind looks at people and looks at life itself and says, oh, this is all screwed up, and we're going to fix it. Mm-hmm. We monkeys, we little talking monkeys, we're going to fix the universe. One thing that's driving my wife crazy recently is there's this recent sort of development where people are beginning to talk about death as a mistake or something that should be preventable. People are approaching the idea of death as if it is some disease that that shouldn't happen, should never. How mad, how insane have we become? What I think is essentially missing at the core of it, Chris, is a humility. I go back to the Greeks and the Greek tragedians. Like I said, I come from the theater, and I believe my reading of a lot of the Greek tragedies, they were rituals, and they were ways of reminding us to have humility, reminding us that we don't run this place, and we don't understand everything, and we probably don't need to fix everything, because a lot of things probably aren't broken, right? what you're describing, what you're describing is I think absolutely accurate, and I think it's kind of at the core of the madness of our times.
I would agree. We're talking with CJ Hopkins, author of this amazing book, The Rise of the New Normal Reich. And it's just a fabulous collection of essays. But we're getting to the heart of something that's really important to me, which is trying to, how do I put this? I feel like I'm caught in a very unusual period of history where we're coming to some sort of a denouement. Right. And I'm a resource guy. So I study resources. I study oil, neodymium, lithium. I understand where we are in that story. I'm a biologist, by training. My PhD's in pathology, so life science. And I understand that all of life is really the study of energy. Right. And so whether it's hairs on an island that suddenly explode in population and then, they do the whole thing, or it's yeast in a vat of sugar, or it's humans who we came across this tasty, tasty stuff called oil. And I am walking oil because once you study it, you see that's actually true, how we conduct ourselves. So we're at this amazing place, 8 billion people, and we have literally no plan B that I found yet, CJ, that explains what this next 50, 100 years is going to look like. We're down to this little tiny frame of reference, which is how does the next quarter, how does the next month, what's the next election? We have this compressed view, and every scientist I talk to, CJ, is over here waving their hands with 2 red flags saying, we've got some issues, and we've lost that 7-generation thought process that seemed to have existed in other cultures where you could actually look forward 100 years. Somebody responsible and grown up was in charge of thinking, where should this all be in 100 years? We're not anywhere near that conversation. And I think that's creating part of this panicky sense that's in the air. We're a herd species. The grass has run out in our valley. We have the sense we should wander to the next lush valley, but there's no next valley. I don't know what it is. There's something in the air that I can't quite put my hands on. But for the people who study it, CJ, they kind of go, oh, we should definitely have a plan. And I don't think we have a plan besides global capitalism, and its plan is we're just going to keep doing this forever. And it just doesn't line up. So I'm wondering about that herd instinct and whether we're starting to feel into that, at least the empathic among us, maybe catching a vibe here.
I think a lot of people are tuning into it, maybe not in the same way. I think it produces a lot of jagged, aggressive energy in a lot of people as well. And others of us are tuning into it and just can't see the way forward. I have you're much more knowledgeable about financial and economic systems and biological systems. I think I have a pretty simplistic contribution, a pretty simplistic analogy. When I think of forms developing in nature, what I note is that often the ultimate expression of the development of a form, just keep it simple, a flower. A flower comes into its full expression, its full bloom, and then what happens?
Fades out.
It collapses. It dies and it falls apart. And often, and when I track, and just as an artist also, and someone who's attuned to the development of forms, cycles of creation and destruction, it feels to me like we are, and I think we're just entering this historical period, but it feels to me like we have entered a historical period wherein the ultimate expression of the form of power that has developed and has succeeded in taking control of the entire planet, the ultimate expression of this form of power is nigh. Here, it's coming. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, I think what accompanies that is collapse and destruction. And when I look at nature, this is the process that I see. And then out of that collapse, out of that destruction, new forms are born. I think that a lot of us, a lot of folks, and naturally, absolutely, it's a natural thing to do. A lot of us, I think, are trying to see how do we get to the future without going through this period of catastrophe and destruction and pain. And I just think of the old Mainers that I used to know who would say, well, you can't get there from here. I don't know if we can avoid that. Chris, it feels like both are coming.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Let me just make this one point, and I'll let you get a word in edgewise. When I talk about totalitarianism, and I use the word a lot in the book, thank you. I want to get to that. The book is titled, the rise of the new Normal Reich, and I'm talking about totalitarianism. I'm talking about a different type of totalitarianism, not 20th century totalitarianism. Totalitarianism to me is not an aberration. It is the logical conclusion of the development of a power system. If you follow me and you say, okay, here's an ideological power system that has hegemonic control over the entire planet, what's the next logical step? Well, totalitarianism is the next logical step. There are no more external enemies. It's about eliminating internal resistance, wiping out internal resistance, and consolidating control. It becomes a very paranoid operation, and I believe it is an operation that ultimately leads to the downfall of that system.
I would agree. I think the system has the seeds of its own destruction. I don't, the cycle of collapse, maybe it's because of my age, and I might have felt differently about this as a 20-year-old man, but at my age, I look at it and I don't fear that. That's normal. I don't fear death at this stage either. It's just, it's part of the deal. What I do fear is this totalitarianism, because it seems joyless, soulless, unfunny, uninteresting, non-polarized. It's kind of bland. I feel like these totalitarians, they want our comedians detoothed. They want our movies to all have an appropriate, state-approved message. It's literally like George Orwell wrote about. It's just, frankly, it's uninteresting to me. That's its greatest sin. You know what the greatest sin of the totalitarianisms to me is? They're boring. Justin Trudeau bores me. He is a boring, that's his biggest sin. I hold him a little bit of contempt, but higher than that in my pantheon of sins is being boring.
If you go back and look at Hitler's paintings, look at what the Nazis thought of as, the ideal artistic expression and what have you. I'm laughing because you took the words right out of my mouth. It's just crushingly dull. When you create, utter uniformity, I think of the old Talking Head song, heaven is a place where nothing ever happens. Everyone agrees with everyone, and yes, we all share the same values, and we don't have to argue about anything. In my novel, this segment of society, they're called the clears. Mm-hmm. They're the clears, and they're past all of our, just basically all of the messy stuff that makes us interesting. It makes us human.
Well, it's anti-human, right? Because to me, my most growthful moments in life were always painful. And I was involved with this group that was doing really fun, creative thing, but then the leadership changed, and finally we made it to that ultimate moment where the new leader said, hey, we all have to do this training because we want to be in a place where nobody's ever triggered. I'm like, how's that possible? I don't know what you grew up with, or that, a loud noise went off when you were 3 and you're scared of closing doors, or I don't know these things. So how could I possibly behave in a way that would never trigger you? And by the way, if you were never got triggered, how would you ever know to grow past that moment so you could be a fuller expression? It felt like they were just saying, we're just going to freeze frame this whole thing and call that the best we can be. And I was like, I don't even know how to start with that. It seems ass backwards, but maybe I've got that wrong.
Chris, I think it's anti-human and it's anti-life. I forgot the $10 word for that, but life is messy. It's a big, messy, painful, beautiful, fun, horrible, scary ride that we get to have. Aren't we lucky that we get to go on this ride? The spirit that we're talking about, and it's really a spirit. It's a spirit that approaches the world and says, "Oh my God, this is horrible. This life thing is terrible. It's threatening. It's scary. It's insulting. What we need to do is replace it with this nice little smiley, Disneyland world, this simulation of life where everything is safe and everyone is nice and we all agree. And that's not life. That's Disneyland."
Yeah. It's a book that really turned my head is Money and the Soul's Desire by a man named Stephen Jenkinson. And he talked in there in particular about money and how it developed over time and our relationship to it. But he decoded that phrase that money is the root of all evil to say, no. Money's neutral. It's a thing. But you have to take the whole phrase, which is for the love of money is the root of all evil, which means it's our relationship to it. And our relationship in this global arrangement it's an abstraction. Humans do poorly at abstractions, but we've invested this abstraction with immense power. And we know this because, like with Arnold Schwarzenegger, I know that this money is a really powerful thing because this college dropout with a dad bod is now the global leader on vaccines. I know this because I turn on the TV and we're listening to a hedge fund manager because they must be seriously important because they have this thing called money, right? And
a genius.
Yes, that's how we know. And so I think maybe I'm wondering if it isn't our relationship to money itself that's really run astray. And I talk with Christians and they're like, oh, this is mammon, right? We can understand this this has happened to humans over and over again, that money comes and takes over and does something to us. If we're not careful about that, if we don't have a society, if we don't have a culture that understands how to put that tool into its place, and we let the tool become the system. I think that's the flaw.
That's right. Because the way I would describe it is it's not so much money that's the problem. It's the lack of any other values to put money and finances and anything else in context. If you go back and I don't want to go back and live in primitive societies or anything like that. That doesn't sound like fun to me. But if you go back and look at the history of social systems, the history of societies, for the most part, they had values that were established one way or the other through the community or through a despot or however they were established. And those values were passed on from generation to generation to generation. And those values were what kept money from becoming the thing that ruled people's lives. Those values were the things that prevented them from, let's rip down this entire forest and, grow a monocrop, because we can make a few dollars. No, because somebody said, well, no, because then we would destroy our whole forest and all the animals that live there and the relationship we have. In other words, what I'm trying to say, I don't think money is the culprit. I think it's the absence of these social values, the absence of our values. It's, I come from the left, and I don't even know what that means anymore. A lot of my readers are conservatives and people coming from the right, and I identify with them because a lot of these people, what they're doing, a lot of this populist pushback, this pushback against global collapse, these are people who are watching their traditional values being dissolved and stripped away. And they're trying to hold on to them. And they're saying, no, I don't want to live in a world where anything is anything and everything is everything and nothing has any value and what have you. We want to hold on to these values. Not saying that I necessarily agree with all of them or what have you, but it is these social values, these human values, these community values that have, I think, kept us alive on the planet this long. And somewhere along the line, we lost it. And, yeah, we're letting the machine, run things rather than us running the machine, and here we are.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that thinking. And um, so I like this one last passage from your book, page 137 here. This is out in, I can't remember which essay this is in, but it's out a bit. And you wrote, in 2016, the American people, sick to the gills of global capitalism and its increasingly oppressive ideology, now we can understand what that means, elected an unauthorized, narcissistic ass clown to the highest office in the land. They did this for a variety of reasons, but mostly it was just a big FU to the establishment. It was an act of rebellion against a government which they know is owned by unaccountable supranational corporations and supercilious oligarchs who openly detest them. So this rebellion, it was unauthorized for sure, and I think that was the sin. That was the sin. The watching that mighty Wurlitzer turn people I knew and used to love, and I've lost friends because they went down this hole of absolutely absorbing in every fiber of their body that Donald Trump represented something that was so unspeakably evil that we can all just agree that anything he touched or did or said was off limits, and you had to do the opposite of that. I was astonished by that because he did a lot of dumb things. He did a lot of non-dumb things, just like every president in my entire life. No difference, no shades of gray between them, as far as I can tell. Right? Mm-hmm. But suddenly, and that was the sin, though.
I laugh, Chris. I'm sorry, I got to jump in, but it's, people forget for 4 years, the papers of record and every, legitimate, news outlet was relentlessly telling us that Donald Trump was both a Russian intelligence operative and literally the resurrection of Hitler. This is Donald Trump, the former reality TV guy. This is a guy who puts his name on steaks. and he was suddenly the arch, demon of, all eternity. It was absolutely bizarre. Sorry.
Yeah, no, the swamp drainer who happened to surround himself with alligators from the swamp, just bizarre. But so really bizarre that we're now I'm caught in this really bizarre place where a lot of those same people who really just viciously hated him are now, they got the Ukraine flags. And I try and talk to him about the Azov battalion and the very complicated history that goes back to the Banderas. And it's like pretty complex territory when you go there. But these people are now openly supporting literal Nazis. And I find that without any intervening daylight or ability to, that's how comprehensive this ideology is. It's got to be, it's really powerful. In fact, I have golf claps for the astonishing alacrity with which these they're not even incoherent, they're diametrically opposed thoughts can be held. It's been a real eye-opener for me. I'm sure you've probably experienced the same, but I do notice there are a lot of people waking up. And so as we close this out, I love to get on a moment of hope here. What are you seeing in terms of people, like these feel like the conversations we really always ought to have had? They're starting to percolate up. That's my experience. What's yours?
It's also my experience, Chris. People are more and more people I'm connecting. I lost a lot of friends during the last 2 years. People just turned their backs on me. And I've made so many new friends and so many new connections from all over the political spectrum, and new alliances are forming. People are having these discussions. We are a minority. I was just talking to a guy the other day, and I was referring to I refer to the Milgram experiments in the book in the first chapter. And if you remember, something like 65% of people were willing to just shock the subjects, to death. And it was 35%. No, I don't think so. And that's basically my take on us as a species. I think there's about 35% of us who are not on board for where this is all going. Some of us more vocal than others, some of us louder than others. What I think I'm watching now is more and more of that 35% are starting to feel like they have permission. They're allowed to start expressing their doubts and expressing their reservations and expressing their dissent. And the more active that full 35% of us becomes, the better. It's enough of us. I don't know if it's enough of us to stop anything. I don't know if stopping anything is possible. I think it's enough of us to play our part. You talked about we talked about the system developing and the seeds of destruction inside of it, and I think we're a part of it. We're an integral part of that. The people like us, the critics, the skeptics, the court jesters. It's probably what I am. Those of us who can see maybe a little bit down the road and start, and maybe we start tearing and pulling at some threads. And I think we are an essential part of that process of creation culminating and destruction coming about and new forms being born. I think I like to think that the new forms that we can't even articulate yet, they're already being born in ways that we don't know, and they're being born among us. Those of us who can maybe see or think that we see the death of this form coming, and are asking questions and throwing out ideas and what have you. I can't describe it altogether, but I do have an essential faith. I have faith in life, and I think we're part of it. I think we're part of it. I think it's just so important that people realize that. I think the shock and awe phase of the new normal rollout is over, and I think people need to hear and realize that they have permission. You can ask those questions. You can post that data. You can say, hey, wow, it seems like a lot of people are, having adverse reactions, and maybe, I don't know what it means, but maybe we should, look into it and at least ask some questions about it. And, we're allowed to do that. And maybe it'll only be 35% of us that are doing it. But I think the more of that 35%, the better.
Yeah, I'll send you an essay by a guy written in 1938 talking about the remnant within the context of the Isaiah parable. But this idea that all through time, there have always been a crew of people who weren't quite down for the dominant story, but they had important roles to play because nature in its infinite wisdom said we're going to have real actual diversity here. And for the most part, having people carrying that center mass story through is the right thing. But when circumstances change, you need your other people who are able to not get invested in that, and who are able to see things from the outside in. It's just, listen, if nature coded it in, it had some sort of evolutionary basis, and so that's how I see it. There's a reason that people like us are out there, and the people who we're increasingly finding are out there. But like you, I found this COVID episode in particular, I'm coming from a science background, I found out who were the intellectual frauds and moral cowards. And I found their opposites too, the giants and the people of high integrity. And now I know them. And CJ, I've made friends in the last couple of years who are, I put quotes around it because I've known people for decades who sloughed away. And I've known people for a couple of years now who are better friends than I think I have ever had before. We've been in the foxhole, or I know where they stand in a really deep level. We don't agree on everything, but I know who they are. And that was actually the gold that came out of all this for me, is finding that tribe. It's been very important to me. So, and I know a lot of people listening to this are nodding their heads too, saying, yep, this has been good. And it's been painful because we lost sometimes family, friends, colleagues, people we've known since childhood, and we've gained too. So it's been a kind of a winnowing process here for a lot of us. At least that's how I've experienced it.
Same here.
Yeah. Well, the book, Rise of the New Normal Reich, author CJ Hopkins. CJ, where else can people find you? I know you've got a Substack, maybe not that exciting of a Twitter.
I've got sorry, my my main thing is probably my blog. It's the consentfactory.org. The Consent Factory being, a shady neoliberal think tank that I have nothing to do with. It also happens to be my blog. All my columns appear there. I've got a Substack as well. I have just an author's website, just cjhopkins.com, which is mostly just artistic stuff and doesn't get terribly political. And I'm just easy to find. You could stick me in a search engine, and all of those links will come up.
Well, fantastic. So again, CJ Hopkins, consentfactory.org, and check out his Substack and as well as his website. But really, get the book, and it's the price of. It's worth the introduction alone, but the essays, it's amazing. It's amazing what you knew when you knew it, and how quickly you unraveled all of this. So really, just extraordinary work. Thank you for being on the program. Thank you for doing what you do, and I hope we'll have another conversation in the future.
Chris, thank you so much. It's honestly a real pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and likewise.